Our southern weather is unpredictable.
We know you've seen a thing or two.
Like heavy rainstorms, extreme heat, and flying debris.
Your New South windows are custom built for your home and designed for extreme conditions.
That's why you need New South by your side.
Enjoy comfort, safety, and security.
We install peace of mind with our lifetime guarantee. Superior windows, factory direct.
New South proud.
Buy more, save more. Volume discounts on 4 or more windows.
Time, weather, and always.
How you doing, everybody? I'm Chief Meteorologist Denis Phillips. Heat's still the hot topic of weather conversation, right? Just smashed the previous record for rainfall in Tampa. Still a very nice day. We've got some clouds out there, even a couple of sprinkles as another front rolls through the area. Most of us wake up to sunshine and then very warm temperatures in the afternoon. Our temperatures, they're going up and they're staying up. Really nice forecast, especially if you're planning on going to the beach or the pool. Rain chances very slim. Another beautiful day in store. It's going to bring us a very high chance of storms. Isolated showers across the area. Mother Nature likes to remind us that it isn't set by a calendar. We're always on it for you, just in case things begin to pop.
Streaming from the ABC Action Weather Center in Studio A, this is Denis Phillips Live.
Sponsored by New South Window Solutions. Made in Florida for Florida homes by Florida workers.
Hey, doing everybody? It is a Tuesday night edition of Denis Phillips Live. We've got quite a few people in here today. I'm not sure I expected so many. We definitely were going to talk local about rain chances for our area, the Bay Area directly. But if you're watching from up north, if you're watching from the Carolinas, I get it. There's certainly been some buzz, some significant buzz about that little yellow hatched area. I'm telling you flat out, it's nothing to worry about. I mean, it might get a little windy, a little gusty, kind of like a nor'easter. Second straight storm. We've been using the term nor'easter. The first one certainly verified perfectly. There really was not much to worry about at all for the Northeast. Didn't really see a lot of cancellations. This go around, I think you might be looking at 40, 45-ish winds along the coast in the Outer Banks of the Carolinas. But at this point, we'll go a little bit deeper into it, let you know how it's going to impact you. We've also obviously got some stuff going on way out in the Atlantic as well. That's worth looking into as well. But before, and I'm going to jump right into it because we do have so many folks, and usually we do our hellos, and I like to do, this particular chat, we love the interaction. It's been like that for a decade. We've been doing this for a lot longer than Facebook Live has been doing it. We started a bunch of us, including Mike at Mike's Weather Page, was part of our original core audience, core group, our chat. Had about 200 of us, and we were trial and error back in the day when you could play music and Facebook wouldn't knock you off the air. When you could do a lot of things, Facebook wouldn't knock you off the air. Now there's a lot more regulations to it, but we have been there. We used to, during hurricane coverage, we'd be on continuous. We would actually play Guitar Hero in this studio with the big monitors. This was 10, 15 years ago, but we would do it as we would have our live chat as well. So the camaraderie has been around for a long, long time. So again, usually we do lots and lots of hellos, but tonight we're going to just jump right into it, shall we? We're going to start. I see a lot of folks here. So yeah, let's talk about it. First we're going to start in with our local weather. Now, actually, you know what? Before that, let's go ahead and look at rainfall potential. All right, I'm going to take some of these graphics full. So it's very clear, and this is kind of a rule of thumb. And by the way, so you look at the rainfall potential with whatever does develop. It is hovering the coast, the Delmarva, the Outer Banks of the Carolinas, right around Georgia. They're getting heavy rain in South Florida now, and then all the way up the Mid-Atlantic. So this is a classic situation with low pressure developing and lifting north or northeast. Regardless of where it develops, the impact will be somewhat consistent rainfall-wise. Wind could be a little bit more of an issue depending on exact track. But when I say more of an issue, what am I talking about? Again, I'll say this again, 40, 45-ish. We've been now 36 hours with the Hurricane Center sticking with that 30% probability. Now, eventually, it'll probably start to go up. But the point is, this is not a rapid development system. Couple of things we throw out here right now, and this is absolutely set in stone this time of the year. From now to the end of October, there's a lot of things that come to pass. First of all, you get a front, all right? This is meteorology 101 here, hurricaneology 101, right? You get a front that comes down, and whatever's pushing that front into Florida, which is high pressure behind it the majority of the time, depending how strong that high is or that push means whether it stalls out in northern Florida, central Florida, or South Florida, all right? When you get a stalled out front, all right, and let's go ahead and look at it. Let's just go ahead and take a glance, shall we? I was going to go local, but I've jumped in with tropics, so let's just go ahead and continue that line of thinking. We're going to start with your friend and mine, the GFS, #Taching. Now, so this takes us through tomorrow morning. What are we looking at here? All right, this, my friends, is a stalled out front. All right. Now, what often happens in the world of weather, all right, what often happens is when you get a front that pushes from north to south, typically these fronts stall out in northern Florida early September. Mid to late September, they can make it to central or southern Florida. Early October, they can make it all the way through. Why? Because think about the push of high pressure building in from the north. It's stronger as we get into fall and winter than it would be in the summer. Makes a lot of sense, right? So while that leading edge of drier air, lower humidity, might only make it into northern Florida in early September, it can make it into central Florida mid to late September. It can make it to South Florida early October. So why am I setting this up? Because what happens the overwhelming majority of the time from now until the end of October, you get low pressure development somewhere along that stalled out front. Happens all the time. All right? Now, in this particular case, that low pressure looks to develop off the coast of Jacksonville. What happens is you get this stalled out boundary, and then you get little pieces of energy. And we track these. This one yesterday was in California. You get upper level energy that rides along the subtropical jet. It eventually interacts with this stalled out front. You get development, and once and if that low is able to differentiate itself from the front itself in development, then you have low pressure development. Whether it's a hybrid, subtropical, or truly a tropical system, what's the difference? Well, we talked about that last week, didn't we? Because how many times did I preach nor'easter, cold core center, not a tropical system? Tropical systems have the wind very close to the center of circulation, right? You get a hurricane, you get an eye, and around that eye is the eye wall. That eye wall is where the majority of the wind is. That is a tropical system by nature, all right? Water temperature of 80 degrees or higher is typically what you need for that to develop and flourish, all right? But as Lee went into the colder water, it started to transition into an extratropical, non-tropical nor'easter system. We said it 11 billion times last week. And there were still conversations about it's going to be a hurricane. No, it's not. When you have a wind field that extends 300 miles out, it's no longer a tropical system. So what happens with that? Okay, the winds will be weaker, but they'll be broader, right? Like a nor'easter. Nor'easters can handle several hundred miles of territory, but the wind doesn't differentiate much from the middle to the outskirts. Tropical systems certainly do. So, as you get this area of low pressure trying to develop, where it develops is paramount. It is huge Because if this low were to, how did I get so sciencey so fast? I was just talking about stuff, and all of a sudden we got into sciencey stuff. So, as the low pressure develops, if it is over the warmer waters of the Gulf Stream, where it's greater than 80 degrees, then it becomes more likely that this low becomes tropical in nature. So what does that mean? Well, we just went over that. If it's tropical in nature, the winds will be closer to the center. And if that center stays offshore, then most of the wind stays offshore, right? And as this low pulls away from the Gulf Stream and enters cooler water off the Carolinas, then all of a sudden you have a system that will likely elongate and the winds will cap out at about 45 knots. So there it is. If it's farther offshore, the winds will be offshore. So let's go back to the models. All right. So we are looking, I'll take this full so you don't need to see me. You can see this. All right. Holy cow, we've got 2,200 folks in here. I expected like a 28. So we've got a lot of folks who are probably interested in the Carolinas and the tropics. I get it with good reason. But I will say this again. I will say this again. Do not freak out about this system. Don't. I mean, look, in the wintertime, when you get a double-barreled low that forms off the Carolinas and moves northeast, you get 60, 65 mile an hour winds. There's just not enough time for this thing. If it were to make landfall somewhere in the Outer Banks or in the Carolinas, South Carolina, it just doesn't have enough time. I revert back to my cousin Vinny. How long did it take? How long were they in the store? 15 minutes. Well, how do you know? Because I was making my grits. I don't know. It takes 5 minutes long. It takes 15 minutes to make grits, unless you have instant grits. And no self-respecting Southerner makes instant grits. I take pride. Never mind. I quote my cousin Vinny when at all possible. All right, let's go back. So, somebody who's not used to watching the chat, what in the heck is this guy quoting my cousin Vinny for? Because it's the greatest movie ever. It's hysterical. All right, let's go back. So we're at the GFS tomorrow. All right, that's tomorrow morning. It's tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, overnight, and then Thursday morning. You're beginning to see a little development Thursday. There's Thursday afternoon. And there you have your first signs of low pressure. Going to Friday morning. Now, let's look at this, shall we? That is Friday morning's GFS. But then now we're going to, identical. Your comments, I love them. All right, so there we go. So this is Friday morning GFS. Here's Friday morning Euro. A little slower, but not much difference. Pretty darn close. So we have global model agreement that this is going to develop. Folks, look at the pressure on this. It's 1,009 millibars. That isn't even a depression. It's some rain. It's rain with a name without the name. All right? It's a little bit of squally weather. Okay? Now, there's always the folks, and I get it. Look, I get it. But there's always the, well, what if? Well, what if this happens? Well, what if it turns into a Cat 3 in the amount of time? No. Step away from the ledge on this one here. All right? I'm telling you. Just like we were saying last week, there's just not enough time for this to really crank up into something for the Carolinas. Now, we'll go farther in, and we'll talk about a couple of possibilities. But if you were to ask me what's going to happen out of this, 40 to 45 mile an hour winds along the coast and some squally weather, that's it, end of story. And then move out to sea. That's it. That's what I see right now. You can always find a model that's going to show, something. Look, there's 51 ensembles. If you're not familiar with what an ensemble is, the GFS, the Euro, and a lot of other models have ensembles. What does that mean? They run the exact same model 51 times, but there's different variables and they're tweaked differently to give different outcomes. And then we hope to see a general solution, a meeting of minds, if you will, in the middle, to have a better idea, but there's always going to be outliers. So here's my deal. Why do you focus on outliers that are more than likely just that, outliers? You know, the Rays are mathematically possible of not losing another game to the end of the World Series, but is that likely? Probably not. So again, my point is, let's focus on the most reasonable conclusion. It is science after all. Let's focus on the most reasonable conclusion. And if it starts to trend in another direction, then we'll start to discuss that. So let's get back to Friday, all right? It's always important because you will always see, and it's all over social, we all know, we scroll through it, you just see it everywhere. And you always see a lot of worst case scenarios focused and posted, and it's just nonsense. It's nonsense. If you're going to do that, then why don't you also post the best case scenario? Because both are probably about the same from the middle. You've got worst case, you've got best case. We all know life is usually somewhere in between. So I don't know, if you want to focus extremes, why don't you post the ones that are always going to miss us? Because it's not as sexy, to be honest. That's the bottom line. It ain't as sexy, right? It doesn't get people talking as much. All right, so this takes us to Friday. You see low pressure at 1,009 millibars, and most of the weather is north of that center. That's Friday morning. There's Friday afternoon. There's Friday evening. We're down to 1,005 millibars. That is a depression and potentially a minimal tropical storm. Which, what did I say, 45, winds 45? Well, that's about what this is, all right? Most of the wind and rain is north of that center, as it should be. It's going to be sheared. And then the GFS actually makes landfall at 1,003 millibars in central North Carolina. That is a 40-mile-an-hour tropical storm with some rain. It's rain with a name, folks. Rain with a name, all right? Now, I do want you to notice that rain does extend into the Delmarva, which, by the way, the folks who are asking, Delmarva, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, Delmarva. I know it because my first TV job was at WBOC in Salisbury, Maryland. Great place to live, by the way. 30 minutes from Ocean City, Maryland, up toward Fenwick Island. They're going to get some squally weather out of this. But again, squally weather is an afternoon thunderstorm, right? So bring it down. It's all good. You know, and by the way, we'll go back, all right? Let's go back and look at the euro in the same time frame. The euro is slower, and that's very, very often the case. The euro is quite often slower than the GFS. Anyway, here's the GFS. Takes it, goes north. Hold on. I got to call up a different map for that, which I will in a second. And then it goes out to sea. All right, let's look at the euro. King Euro has tomorrow morning. We already focused through Friday morning. It's about the same, all right? Friday afternoon, Friday evening, Friday night, Saturday morning. Definitely meandering a little bit more before it starts to be kicked up. Now, let's say, what does that mean? All right, if it meanders in the Gulf Stream, there would be the potential it could get a little stronger, but the euro is not showing that at 1,006 millibars. And then it finally gets lifted to the northeast and actually makes landfall on the Outer Banks, which is a track that is very, very common, and then goes out to sea. Let's look at the Atlantic picture, and this maybe you can see it a little bit better. All right? And then we'll talk about the other blob that's out there. So that's the euro. Okay, we're not looking at Nigel. No, quoting the Devil Wears Prada. All right, there's tomorrow morning. There, let's go to Friday, because we're already established Friday's when things get going. So there it is. There's the euro Friday, all right? Here's the euro Saturday. The squally weather extends all the way up toward the Delmarva. Matter of fact, the amount of weather that's actually around the low center itself is negligible. Most of the weather will be up toward the north. All right? So there you go. And then we continue to lift it north, kind of hovers the east coast and goes out to sea. Matter of fact, it almost looks like there's a transfer of energy there. You get a secondary low develop. Oh, look at that. Kind of like a nor'easter. And there it goes. Let's keep looking, because there is this thing down here, right? There's not a lot to it. But what does the euro do with this? This is actually the GFS. Yeah, because the GFS is farther south. So let's look at that. The GFS brings what would be Ophelia or Philippe into the Caribbean. Now, what is my thought about that? All right. I will show you my thoughts, and I will start with El Nino. Why are we talking about El Nino? All right, I will show you in just a second. Let me get the map here. Okay, so when you are in an El Nino year, okay, when you're in an El Nino year, and by the way, this could be very good for the Southeast this winter, needing rain. When you have an El Nino, you have all that warm water off the Pacific, and it has a big impact on the trade winds. In the wintertime, it quite often leads to a subtropical jet that's far more active across the deep south in the Gulf. So those red arrows are an indication that we could see higher storm risks in the wintertime, which means higher rainfall, which is much better considering the drought that we're in, right? But here's what I want to talk about. Look at the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, in an El Nino year, it is very, very common, in fact, it's the norm, that the Caribbean gets shut down from tropical development. Now I ask you, sounds like my cousin Vinny again. Now I ask you, how many systems have we had form in the Caribbean this hurricane season? How many have formed? Not in the northern Caribbean, I'm talking about down across the islands, all right? Not many. Well, let's look at the experimental models and show the Caribbean, because the brown colors here indicate drier than normal weather. Look in the Caribbean for next week. Look at all the dryness. Look at all the lack of development. That is a classic El Nino tongue right there. And then look where all the action is, north of the islands. And what happens north of the islands this time of the year? I think we covered this already. One trough after another trough from the end of September through October, you are bound to have a front or a trough eventually make it to the East Coast. Now, we had them all summer long, which is why Florida had a westerly flow all summer, and folks up north had a wetter than average summer anywhere from the Carolinas northward because of one trough after another. So stick with me here. You get a front that's coming across, right? You get a hurricane that's coming this way. Eventually, that hurricane is going to hit the trough and curve off to the northeast. The more troughs you get, the more fronts you get, the more likely it is you're going to have a curve, which is why, climatologically speaking, looking back at history over the last 30 years, and then some, the overwhelming majority of hurricanes that form in the Atlantic from end of September to October will curve away from the United States. Period. That is the track that almost always happens. Not always, but almost always. There's always a diamond in a rough. There's always a blind squirrel that finds a nut. I mean, you know, there's always the possibility. But overall, from where we are right now to the end of the hurricane season, it is far less likely that a storm can survive through the Caribbean from the eastern Atlantic, the tropical Atlantic off of Africa, make it through the Caribbean and curve up. You never say never, it's always possible, but it's always far more likely that development will be in the northern Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico. So you look at this map again and you say, all right, well, let's look at the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. And we see below average development. Where do we see more development? North, where it will eventually run into a trough and curve. It's just science. And look at the following week, October 3rd through the 10th. Look at the Caribbean, completely dried out. Look at the Western Gulf, completely dried out. Where's development? North of the islands, which would eventually, more than likely, run into a trough. Does this make sense? Am I making even remote sense in my point here? So we're now coming up on the end of September, right? So it is far more likely that whatever develops in the Atlantic, whether it's a big red blob or not, is eventually going to curve. That's just climatology. There's always exceptions. But as many fronts as we've been getting the last 7 to 10 days, and as many as we expect over the next 2 to 3 weeks, you would expect a front to constantly make it to the East Coast every 7 days, goes out, and eventually a storm is going to turn. I say that because when you look at the long range, and I'm just going to go ahead and we'll go back with the GFS. Here, we'll go to the GFS here, and we'll just run this. We will run this loop. All right, so here's the GFS. And you've got your development off of Florida, but we've already talked about that one in the Carolinas. So let's look at this big red blob out here and watch it as it's going across. The GFS is the farthest south of any of the models, as it is trying to build a ridge in. What does that mean? Okay? See that big red H right there? I'm sorry, the big blue H? That is a ridge. There we go. See that big blue H? That is a ridge. That is a blocking high. Now, if all things were equal, it would force this all the way west, and it would continue west if that ridge were to build. But what causes a ridge to break down? Say it with me, a trough or a front, right? So as long as these troughs keep coming in, I don't care how strong a ridge is, eventually it's going to break down and there's going to be a curve, all right? So let's keep going. This is the GFS in 4 days. You look at it, it's still building. The ridge is pretty strong. See that big blue high? It's pretty strong, and it's forcing it west. It's not taking into account, well, it's also building it far to the east. So anyway, that ridge is there. But at some point, you're going to see curvature, because there comes a big trough. See it? See the big trough? See the front? Watch it again. There it goes, there it goes, there it goes, there it goes. It goes into the islands and it starts. Now that's the euro. That is the euro. And by the way, that makes more sense to me. The euro hits the trough. Look at that trough. Look at that trough. I'm going to hit stop on here. Look at that front all the way out there. See that curve? That's a front. Now you look at the GFS. The GFS is going to go more south. Just watch it. The ridge is stronger. See it going into the islands? Pretty strong. But it hits those upper level winds. It hits the winds brought on by an El Nino. And what happens? It starts to curve north. Just watch it. See it? And there it curves. Now the GFS, anyway, I have 10 days out is nonsense anyway, let's be honest. But the GFS has definitely been a little more bullish on the more southerly track. Not saying it can't happen, saying that it's less likely, and even if it does happen, it's probably going to run into one shear in the Caribbean or two, an eventual turn with a frontal boundary coming in. All right? So that, in a nutshell, is what we think is going to happen. Now, Tammy, you bring up a good point. Is it okay to decorate? I'm putting out my Halloween decorations this weekend outside. So I am going with climatology. But if you look, I want to show you this map too. Hold on, stand by. No, that's not the one. This is the one. This one. All right, so if you look at the time of the year, we're now on the downward trend, but there's always that little uptick in October. See that little uptick in October? That is almost always a Caribbean or a Gulf of Mexico system. Like 99% of the time, the tropical Atlantic is done by the second week in October. And that's what happens. The waters start to cool, whatever forms curves. The warmest water is still in the Caribbean, but you're looking at an El Nino, so you have an unfavorable wind field. The Gulf of so if things were to develop close to our area in the Gulf or the Caribbean, it would be more than likely a homegrown system, something that develops in the northern Caribbean, kind of like Idalia did. That would be more likely. So if you're watching on our streaming apps, thank you for watching. I'm going to continue on Facebook for a few minutes. We'll be back on Thursday night with an update. Thursday, there could be some winds for the Carolinas, but for the Bay Area, we clear out. Have a good night. Okay, so I'm staying here. So yes, I am putting up my Halloween decorations this weekend. Well, I've been told that I'm putting up my Halloween decorations this weekend, so that means I'm putting up my Halloween decorations this weekend. So let's go back and look. So again, if you look at the Euro right here, the Euro has that curvature and there's no threat whatsoever. And by the way, you can say that's the case, again, up north as well. I'm just going to put this here so you can watch it. Just watch it. So here is the Euro. It's 2 days from now. You've got Nigel, moving out. You've got development, maybe Ophelia, maybe. Could be a subtropical storm, truly not tropical, that's for sure. And then it actually kind of splits and maybe secondary low develops. All staying offshore. Then you've got this thing that we're talking, the big red blob, and it's really an open wave at this point. There's nothing to it. And it runs into a powerful front. You can see that. There's your low. There's your trailing front right there, which I think is probably a little unlikely. But regardless, at some point in time, curvature seems very, very likely. All right? Now, let's look at the GFS. GFS, you look at your development. There's your low, subtropical. A little gusty in the Carolinas, no big deal. Don't worry about it. 45, maybe even 50, gust to 50. That's an afternoon thunderstorm. You'll be fine. And then it moves out. Now we look at our blob, now entering the islands. There they are. See it? There it goes. To me, this is a very unlikely track for several reasons, but whatever. Here's the GFS. I am showing it, and then it kind of starts to curve over Cuba, and then eventually curves off to the northeast. See it? And curves. Because that's what storms do. In October, if they're in the Atlantic, they curve. That's it. So we can try to cherry pick 1 out of 51 members of the ensemble that brings a Cat 3 into somebody and show that, or we could be more realistic. I choose B. I mean, why? Because you're going to be wrong 9 times out of 10 if you show the worst model. It is, one time it might be right, and then, oh, look, yeah, but the other 9 times, that's not your job, Our goal is to try to get the weather right the best we can, not try to create as much buzz as we can. So, anyway, that's what I got. Sean wants to know where the 540 line is. Sean, that's a very good question. Let us look at the Euro. Let's look at the GFS, actually. And let's see where your friend and mine, the 540 line, is. If you want to know what that is, it's the freezing line. Sean is a big fan of the freezing line, as many of us are. All right, so let's call it up. So the 540 line would be a nice little blue line, and I ain't seen no 540 line yet. Let's keep looking. No 540 line. There's your subtropical system going into central North Carolina with 45-mile-an-hour winds. I think that's about exactly what it would be, about 45-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, some rain, some squally weather. I'll say it again, squally weather. And it's going to extend well out to the north of the center, that's for sure. And then look, it goes in and it just kind of dies. But look, we're looking for the 540 line. We might see it. Up, wait. Look, what's that little up there? What is that right there? It might be a little circle, 540 up. What is that? Wait. That's probably your 540 line right there in northern Maine. So, Sean, you got to go to Maine, my buddy. Got to go to Maine. Let's see if it... Yeah, see, there's the 564 line, 558. Yeah, I ain't seen no 540 line. But there's the GFS with a Cat 4 hurricane curving. Oh, your GFS is so silly. Okay, so I'm going to answer some questions now because we finished our analysis. And hopefully we have not suffered paralysis of the brain because of the analysis. But I call them like I see them, guys. You know this. You know, it's just what I do. And I do get frustrated when I see national media sources that are just, and it was with Lee too. Millions of people bracing. No, not really. They played a football game right on time in Boston Saturday at noon. It was a little windy, not a big deal. It just, I don't know. It's like Chicken Little. You know, you say it over and over again. At some point, people aren't going to believe it. And then when their big one does come, they're going to ignore it, and then it's going to be bad. That is just my worst. That is my worst case scenario. Okay, did I find the skeleton? Yes, Michaela, we did. And it was delivered to my son for their wedding present. My son's wedding's in October in New Orleans. And I already told my boss, look, there's Andrew. By the way, Andrew, I thought about you when that drier air came out there this morning. And I thought, wasn't it a week ago that we said there'd be lower humidity on Tuesday? And Andrew came in, he's like, ditch the 7-day. What happened to the cooler, lower temperatures? And I'm like, you know what? It happened. So I wondered if you were actually out there. I don't know. Anyway, so I told my boss, I'm like, all right, so if there's a hurricane October 13th or 14th, I'm going to miss my son's wedding. And I will, because you got your responsibilities. And my responsibility is to pay for the wedding and to be here. So that's what it is. Now, I did tell my son, why did you set up a wedding in mid-October in New Orleans when it's very possible you could have a hurricane? Like, well, because we like Halloween. Like, all right, you know, it's your wedding. Doreen, how you doing in South Tampa? Good to see you. So, all right. So any other questions about the storm, about fronts, about our weather? Yes, it was drier this morning, Miranda. It wasn't really cooler, but the dew points were lower north of I-4. And tomorrow, the dew points rise again as we start to see a chance of some rain late afternoon, east to west flow. And then Thursday, as that low starts to develop, it'll start taking the moisture away from it. And Friday and Saturday, we see some drier air returning. 20-foot skeleton, Sean. Oh my. I'm feeling like my size is an issue now if I'm only have a 12-foot skeleton. I want bigger. I mean, you know? Rain tomorrow for the coast. Brian, late afternoon stuff along the coast. Maybe about 30 to 40% coverage. The big changes, B-dubs, I didn't even get to the forecast, did I? I talked all about the tropics. Much lower humidity on Saturday and Sunday. A beautiful weekend, no rain, comfortable humidity, and morning lows in the 60s on Sunday morning. How about that? Will there be a hurricane in the Gulf in the first weekend of October? Renee, my guess is no. The weather for Tampa. All right, you know what? I'm going to give you guys a forecast because we haven't really given the Tampa forecast. And the folks from the Carolinas who were here and wanted to get their hurricane stuff, they got theirs. And now we're going to talk about the Bay Area's changes and stuff like that, okay? 60s, Sean. That's exactly right. All right, here we go. Still some rain going on right now. Southern counties. You can see that area. That's your frontal boundary trying to lift back north as a warm front, which is step one. In the morning, Carol, upper 60s Sunday morning. Yep, think so. It'll last one day, maybe a day and a half. So there's the storms offshore of Sarasota. You can see a little bit of lightning going on down there. It's lifting north. Frontal boundary moved through as a cold front, stalled out. And that's what happens. Again, we're back to Meteorology 101. Cold front comes down, stalls out, starts to lift back north as a warm front. Low pressure develops along the front and lifts north. Classic setup for tropical systems in September and October. All right, there's the heavy rain going on down south. Temperatures right now, mostly in the 80s. After highs today in the upper 80s to the lower 90s. Tampa hit 91, that's 1 degree above average. Upper 80s, Clearwater, St. Pete, and Sarasota. Outside right now, cloudy at the airport, 85 degrees. Look at the dew point in the 60s. It's going to be rising tomorrow. Andrew, just stop. You can't admit the fact that a week ago we said drier air, you came out and said it was wrong, and it wasn't wrong. There have been plenty of times 7 days wrong that far out. This time it was not one of those times. So give us the props that we deserve and move on to the next time that you can bash. Which, by the way, I haven't really done a lot on TikTok. I've done some, but it's kind of like Twitter in the sense that the people who bash, they're so amazing. I mean, they live for bashing, but when you get it right, they just go away. But they live for bashing. It is truly the highlight of their life to try to bash a weather forecast. It does make me laugh. I'm not going to lie, it makes me laugh. All right, east winds tomorrow, and those east winds mean more late day, early evening storms. So we were 3 degrees, and great example there. This morning, we only dropped down to 78, right? But it felt cooler because it's not the heat, it's the humidity, right? And we dropped down to 78, that's it. But the dew points were in the 60s, and it felt a lot better. So there's the rain that's trying to lift back north as that warm front, as the frontal boundary tries to lift back north again. Few evening showers are possible, but otherwise tomorrow morning will be dry. Upper 70s, humidity returns tomorrow. Maybe not Citrus and Hernando in the morning, but in the afternoon they will. We're back to an easterly flow. That means humidity increases. That means rain chances start on the East Coast in the afternoon and work westward later in the day. Coverage only about 30-40%. Not going to be great, but there will be some. All right. Thursday is a very tricky forecast because as low pressure develops, how much moisture is going to swing around back into our area? It's a tough call. I think the Weather Service went about 40, actually the Weather Service went 70% coverage. I went 40-50. I think we're going to be on the low side of that. All right. 64 in Tallahassee this morning, Dawn. That is a sign of things to come. So anyway, there's a look at Thursday. You see some rain, and then on Friday, as the low pulls away, on the backside, counterclockwise flow, low pressure, on the backside, that drier air is going to come right down the state. And we will see lower humidity on Saturday and again on Sunday. High temperatures tomorrow with clouds building. I think we're going to be upper 80s. There will be some rain. Coverage, again, about 30-40%, in my opinion. And not in the morning, mostly afternoon and evening as it moves from east to west. All right? Notice on Saturday, high of 87, but the humidity, Saturday is going to be a great day. Unless this low does something unexpected. And again, yes, there is an out. It doesn't exist yet. But we are confident it will. You saw the GFS and the Euro, hashtag cha-ching, very close to each other. Confident it will be here, meaning drier air. And look at the model data. There's your rain coverage on Wednesday and Thursday, but look at Friday, Saturday. Much lower coverage. I put 10%. I wouldn't be surprised if we have absolutely no rain at all. And here's the update again. You see the yellow blob and the red blob. We've covered them both. Yellow blob turns into a tropical or subtropical system. Gusty winds, 40-45 in the Carolinas. Squally weather is the best way to describe it. The red one likely will develop, but whatever it does, it should curve. Even if the GFS is right and it makes it into the Caribbean, which I think is unlikely, it will still eventually hit a trough and curve. All right? So, there's your forecast overnight. A few evening showers, not many. Tomorrow morning, mostly cloudy. It'll be warm. Mugginess returns later in the day. For the boaters, east winds about 10 knots. Water temperature, Clearwater 87. Water temperature in the bay is still 90 degrees. There's your sunrise and your sunset. The beach forecast tomorrow, dry in the morning, but some scattered storms in the afternoon. Between 3 and 6, probably the highest likelihood. Highs in the mid to upper 80s. Bus ride in tomorrow for the kids. Dry to start the day, dodging a few storms in the afternoon. Will the weather be nasty on Thursday in Jacksonville? Lizette, it's going to start to develop in Jacksonville Thursday. I think probably Friday morning is a better chance, but I still think, remember, most of the weather is north of that center. Remember? Let me go to the 7-day real quick. There it is. There's the 7-day. Rain chances down to 10% or less by the weekend. It doesn't look much different, but look at the mornings. Tampa, we go 72, and that means we're 60s north of I-4 on Saturday and Sunday morning. But I'll show you the Jacksonville because that's a valid question here. So you ask about development. Remember, this takes us tomorrow. This is Thursday morning. This is Friday morning. Look at where your low is and look at where almost all the weather is, north of the center. So really the only rain in Jacksonville is Thursday as it's kind of getting its act together. And then once it begins to develop, it draws the moisture away. I use the example. It's my favorite example. I have no idea what the heck it's called, but you know the whole figure skating deal? When they're like going in the middle and they start spinning really fast and they bring their arms in and they go faster and faster as they bring all the energy more toward the central part of their being, right? So, and then when they pull their arms out, they stop, right? So as this low tries to develop and you get a little more spin, it draws things more into the middle. And since it's well offshore, it would take the rain away from it from Jacksonville. Got it? I think the wedding will be great, Carol. The wedding should be perfect. I don't think it's called a figure eight, Ryan. And I don't think it's called a figure eight either. I don't know what the heck it's called. Like a flying Lutz or something. I don't even know what the heck it's called. But it's called something. Wait a minute. Let's Google that. What's the name of the spinny thing figure skaters do? The upright? I don't know. It's called the sit spin, the camel spin, the upright spin. I don't know. I tried. That's it, guys. That's it. We'll be back on Thursday. Maybe tomorrow. If this thing's actually developing, we'll probably come back tomorrow as well, especially if it's going to have an impact in the Carolinas as a squally weather situation on Thursday. So Jules said it's a sow cow. And the fact that I pronounced that, I think it's called a sow cow. So thank you for that, Jules. And Jules knows her sports. Jules is not just a Marylander who only knows blue crabs and the Orioles. Jules knows her sports. It's a true thing. So anyway, you guys have a good night. Probably be back tomorrow night just to give you an update on what's happening with our changes, with their changes. And then Andrew will be back to bash the 7-day again. So that's always worth a view. So you guys have a great night. And we'll see you on tomorrow's edition of Denis Phillips Live. Thanks for stopping by, guys.
Our southern weather is unpredictable.
We know you've seen a thing or two.
Like heavy rainstorms, extreme heat, and flying debris.
Your new south windows are custom built for your home and designed for extreme conditions.
That's why you need New South by your side.
Enjoy comfort, safety, and security.
We install peace of mind with our lifetime guarantee. Superior Windows, factory direct.
New South proud.
Buy more, save more. Volume discounts on 4 or more windows.